So we've talked a lot. We've gone pretty deep into the 64 factors, the one-page factor, talking about the performance key indexes, sort of all of the pieces to it. Now we're going to focus a little bit on when you're actually hiring an individual, and if you're actually working with an organization that's hiring, and I think you guys use it as a hiring tool. I know at PG Wireless, you guys, nobody comes into the company. Yes, nobody comes into the company without going through the DNA process. You guys are very tight on that. Hugh, I think, worked with the company before I started building the benchmark that you guys use. So it's used quite heavily with PG Wireless. So we'll talk about building a better process. And I just worked on a recent engagement with a hotel group, and they had some high-performing hotels in this group, and they had some ones that they considered low performers. So we were able to use the DNA profile, figure out, everybody completed it, and then we were able to figure out who the high performers were, the low performers, and what the benchmark was for that. It was quite an interesting project to work on. But there's a lot of purposes for using the natural behavior information, but in this hiring performance, you'll see it's part of the module. But we spend time, and we just did a webinar this week on hiring and onboarding new employees. We've talked a lot today about, are you the right fit for the role? We talked about sort of the role I had when I was young in my career. Maybe not, it wasn't the more natural fit for me, and I bet we all have had experiences where you took the job because you needed it, but it might have been a wrong fit. And if you use a behavioral sort of process to do that, and obviously there's other things that you'd want to do in the recruiting process, like interviewing, reference checks, background checks, things like that are important to the overall process. But the objective is fitting the candidate into the right roles, really getting below the surface in that interview. You mentioned that sometimes with salespeople that they'll come in and they're very talented at telling the story, but they may actually be the wrong fit for the type of role that you have. So people can be very impressive in the interview, but having this behavioral information be quite impactful. And then the high cost of a bad hire, and I think we probably all have examples of that. Certainly we certainly know that, can be 1 times the annual salary of the individual to millions of dollars, depending on sort of where that person fits into the organization. I've seen it, and Nikki's seen it. Certainly in the large organizations that we've worked in, I think every one of us could recite sort of a bad hire experience. When you're matching talents to roles, what you want to do is really look at the role that you're hiring for. And I think you probably see with the work that we've done this morning and this afternoon around who might actually be a better fit if we think about the profile type for these roles. And then actually building that benchmark sort of in the business. I would say that we're very sort of mindful that, there are certain factors that, probably can fit in one role or another role. But what you're trying to do is really help an organization in their hiring, because in some large companies, there are people that will apply for a job. They'll have 2,000 or 3,000 candidates. I think at the volume you guys do, a lot of people apply for jobs, and then you guys run it through the benchmark. It probably saves your recruiters a lot of time and effort putting the right people in the right roles. And then building a hiring process, and this is some information from the university, or the Michigan State, John Hunter, that when you use an assessment process, you can actually increase chances of accuracy of hiring to 53%. When you use a job profiling, really you increase it to 75%. It's a huge sort of getting it right. And these are the factors that you can do. We're big around cognitive testing as well. It's important. Interviewing, reference checks, education, interest, and then using sort of a process like natural behavior.
Yeah, just to emphasize one point that Leon was making there about job profiling, and I think a lot of employers forget to do, is to identify the behavioral traits that are required for the role. And this is really getting down to the benchmarking of the role. So what behavioral talents, not skills, we're all good at writing out skills. We need to be able to, use Microsoft Word and CRM systems, and had to have gone to university and got an MBA or whatever is required. But a lot of employers, when they are designing a role, forget to put in there the specific behavioural talents that are required. And when we help anybody with hiring, that's something that we really drill into, so that when they use our system, you can match up to see, okay, has the person got these traits in their profile output that will match the role required. And if they don't, then there's no, in our view, there's no interview. Anyway, that's a slide coming up, but I think it's important. That's what the job profiling is really doing. It's not just, a behavioural profile isn't just of itself going to do the trick. It's the job profile plus the behavioural profile. And if you do that, then, and using ours, you're going to get a much higher reliability in the whole process.
Does everybody understand sort of the job profiling, what that would be? Sort of if somebody's a little more creative, a little more anchored sort of thing, you probably want a little bit of that. If you have somebody working in customer care, that's a repeatable process role, you want them to be a little bit more anchored, experience-based than completely creative every time. Just that's sort of the build out of what that job profiling would look like. Cost of a bad hire. This is actually a stat. You can see where the higher the average annual salary would be, the cost to the business can be very impactful, and depending on how long that employee's been disrupting the organization. And I'm sure we all have experiences with that, but it can really lead to lots of expense to the business, some hidden costs. Somebody was a performer in the role with one manager, they bring in a new manager, that person becomes very unproductive, and it happens a lot. So getting the right person with the right behavioral fit, obviously the culture fit's going to be very important as well. We have this great tool. It's a handbook. It's actually walks through sort of case study. It talks about how to build a benchmark, and it really does start some of the things that we've alluded to. Building a positive hiring culture is probably the most important part of that. Defining the system, clear processes around that. Identifying the role. You'd be surprised at how many people sort of know I need to get somebody in customer care, but they don't have a job description. That sort of says something about how things are done, a little more spontaneous, but it's important to have that. Building the role benchmark, but based on sort of that role, and then matching the talent to the role. You can actually do that pretty effectively, and sort of just to talk through how that would work. If somebody, I think what you guys do at PG Wireless, everybody takes the profile, you're able to see the role that they're in, and you sort of match it, and the managers only interview the people that are selected in that with those talents.
Yeah,
Do you want to speak to that?
yeah, it's really helped me in my role. So we, pre-merger, we did all the interviewing as district managers, and it really consumed a lot of my time. I mean, we had just recently a big turnover rate due to just everything new with the merger. And if it would have been pre-merger, it was a mess. It would take up pretty much a full week's time to at least get 2 or 3 people even somewhat staffed in the store. So now what it's done for me at my level, my role, I have complete trust in the process and the way we've done things. In the beginning, it was a process for me to get the understanding and understand that this is a great thing. So now I'll get a call from Jamie, who does our hiring, and she'll say, hey, I got a great person. They're an engager. They interviewed with Nikki down in Macon. Nikki wants to hire her. Do you want to do a second interview? No, I'm good. Hire them. And it's really put so much trust in the program by the turnover rate. It is down so much in my district that I am so grateful for it, because I don't have to interview, and we're keeping our people because we're picking the people that fit that manager and fit that store.
Excellent.
It's been awesome. I don't have to touch it, which is great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, actually, Jamie came through this class last year, I believe. Yeah. So obviously, you guys put a lot of faith in this process, but it really does reduce a lot of time and effort in building that talent to the role. And then this is another point, and one of the reasons that you're here, Tyler, is matching managers to role. Because once they're sort of onboarded in the company, or there's a good match, you still have to make sure that they're the right fit with the team, the work that they're doing. Things like comparison reports are quite effective. I don't know if you guys use those in the stores. I think that's one of the reasons you're here, is to learn. That's really important, making sure that the managers understand, because we do have, as somebody's onboarding, we talked earlier today, that Tuckman model of when a team is forming, then they go into the storming, the norming, and then performing. So in the storming phase, you can sort of short circuit that by making sure people understand the behavioral fit of each individual.
I think that's one of the powers of the system we have, because we not just focus on the behavioural measurements, but our system has been built to build relationships, that the onboarding process is a part of hiring that's completely forgotten. And so it's one thing to get the person in there who's got the right talents, but what do you do with them when they're in there? And how do they get treated? And we're doing a project for one of the big 4 accounting firms where we're being retained to hire all of the staff accountants coming into their various branch offices. And that was really the part that sealed the day. It wasn't just they weren't doing anything, but the behavioural assessment up front against benchmarks. Could this person be a future leader, or are they going to be a technician? Those things are sorted out. They need a balance of both. But then how are they going to be treated by their manager when they first come in? Because the turnover in the first 6 months is horrible. It's hopeless. It's very high, and it costs the firms a lot of money. And you've got young people being managed by young people. If you just come out of university and you're a smart, quite a smart unit, and then you get roughhoused by a 25-year-old or a 26-year-old who doesn't know how to deal with people, what are you going to do? You've got plenty of other jobs you can go to where someone's more emotionally trained. So, the onboarding process is so important because the reason people leave is because of their boss. Thank you, Leon, for staying.
That's great, but that is probably the key, the onboarding of the employees. So you got a good behavioral match, but then using the tools to be able to really get team effectiveness.
And I think the other thing that we really encourage, and this is why firms like PG Wireless are on the subscription model with us, is in the traditional hiring process, firm will put out an application for the job, opportunity you can apply. They close it off. They screen they review the resumes. They screen a few people. 5 or 6 or 10 people come in for an interview. We narrow it down, to 5, and then at that point of the last 5, they go through an assessment, because, if you go through other firms, it costs too much to do it any earlier than that. Whereas, really, to Tyler's point, it's wasting a lot of time. And so, for some of the roles we've hired for in our office, we've had 300 people go through the assessment. And so that we can narrow it down so we get the right talents first, and then we will speak to them on the telephone to see whether they are going to fit, and then they come in for the interview. But we know then we've got the right units who have come in for the interview at least. And that's where we found there's been a huge time saving. And so if you can profile everybody as part of the process up front, that is better. And that's what we've done with this accounting firm. Everybody who's interested in coming to this firm is being profiled up front.
And so one thing, just from an EEOC perspective, if you put everybody through the process, like an interview process, you're not really going to have any HR issues or any sort of, going to file a complaint. When you do that more selective, the top 5 candidates, somebody that actually applied, some has justification to, make an inquiry. So we're big believers of have everybody go through it. If you're doing it universally, you're not going to have any issues. Monique, I know you have a question.
I know I have a question. How do you handle the benchmarking to not create an environment of a bunch of clones?
Yeah, so the benchmark is, in the ideal world, is created off, if you're hiring a lot of people for doing something that's very similar, for like a particular, you're selling Coca-Cola, or a very consistent product, and you've got a lot of people doing that, or like the hotel, and you need a certain type of person to be the manager, who's going to be successful in the manager and running a hotel and to that culture. I think that's where the benchmark really works well, and you would want pretty consistent talents in those roles, unless there's a special needs, if that makes sense. Now there are, in a sales team and an overall sales team, you wouldn't want everybody to be the same, because there are different layers within the sales, there's different products, there's different types of clients, and that's where you'd build out the diversity. But for people doing a very specific thing, and there's a lot of them, then the benchmark becomes very useful.
Yep, that's good. Michelle?
Who do you all work with people to create these benchmarks and the roles and all that? I mean, I'm wondering if we have that. I don't know that we have that for our team. It is. Okay. Okay.
We do work with the firms, typically sort of identify more of a culture aspect of it.
If you want to do it, create the benchmarks, we'll help you do them, and in terms of, the idea is, I think we've got a slide coming up, but the idea is that, you get 25 people or so who have been successful in the role to complete it, 10 who have not, and then let's have a look at the traits, and there will be a pattern in there, and that builds the line that you want. But then, to the point that Monique's raising, there might be some people there that are extremely skilled or experienced in the particular area. They're an environmental fit, but some of their talents are outside. You might say, okay, we'll take a chance on them because they're proven. But I found the benchmarks a very good benchmark is very environmental to the business. So you could be good at, one good example of this is a woman that I know was great at selling tax software at Deloitte's, but she had all the clients handed to her. It was, okay, you want tax software, the tax partner would sell it, say, you need compliance tax software, meet Pam. Pam would go and meet them, and she was a nice, warm, cuddly teddy bear with them. Relationship, signed up the contract. But there was no rejection because it had already effectively been solved. Then she went to she left to go and sell software for a new greenfields company that hadn't even finished building its software. Rejection all day long. She couldn't do it. I told her that was what was going to happen. 6 months later, she's out of the job.
So I'll share something with you that goes along with what we're talking about here. We had one of our district managers who's still with the company in the role of district manager when we first merged, and she did a good job, and we're friends, and I would say this if she was here in front of me today, but she always was put in good situations. She had good locations. So when we merged, everything kind of got shaken up, and it became a harder role for her. So looking at her DNA, she is the exact opposite of somebody that should be a district manager. We just shook it up. Kevin put her in a role now where she's training people. She's building, training programs, and it has been a game changer for our company because we just looked at what she could do and what her makeup is, and it's worked so well. It's worked great for us.
You are going to be in so many videos.
It's well, and here's the thing, and why I can talk about it is because, like I said earlier, for me, when all this was introduced to me, I didn't know about it, and it was kind of like, what is this? But now I've gone through it for 2 years. I've seen so many things that have been referenced to this, and I've seen how it's played out and how well it's worked for our company to get us 2 years in a rough spot to now, a much better company. So it's been good.
Steve Mintz out for his steak dinner.
There you go.
That's great. Thank you.
Steve's his boss.
Yeah, we've been talking about that. That's part of our case study work today. And then conducting the behavioral interview, which we've touched on. And then it obviously is a loop, building that positive culture. So I know we are getting close, tight on time. Nikki's giving me like the Gong Show hook, so I'm going to move through these. So we will complete this with the hiring sort of portion to this, or the module, and then we do have time built in tomorrow to really hit teams. So I don't want you to think we're short-circuiting anything, because I think this is just important to go through. But we've talked about on hiring sort of the natural behaviors. We've talked a lot about those. But remember, those learned behaviors really do weigh in. That's where you're going to get in the interview with someone, learning their passions, their interests, beliefs. You get a lot out of that. So I would never make just if somebody has the natural behavior fit, it doesn't mean they're a perfect candidate. They certainly have the qualifications from that perspective, but you really do want to understand their learned behaviors. Because two reflective thinkers might have a very different passion and interest in the way that they work. And then it's important on the cognitive factors, because remember, we're seeing a behavioral fit here with business DNA, but understanding, when somebody is a reflective thinker, and that says, yeah, they're probably good at planning and process, but they may not have sort of the skills, knowledge, and there's other sort of job skill assessments that you can really make sure. That really does. Those 3 phases are part of that interview process. Anybody, I know PG Wireless has that built in, but anybody else have any hiring experience that they use? Do you guys use sort of a blend of this?
It is, but it's definitely not this comprehensive.
Okay.
It's situational things that we assess for.
Okay. And the one report that we'll hit on today is the hiring report. It's a very simple report. It's literally a 2-page report, but it has some amazing information on it. And I really do mean this, that it shows the 10 desired tasks, the 5 desired team roles for that person, 5 desired work environment, and rewards. Because contrary to what people think, people are very motivated by money. That's a very temporary sort of reward. So you really can get underneath. I thought we had do we not have a hiring report in here?
It's going to come up in the case studies.
It will, okay. Because I really want to cover that with us. And then the interviewing question guides, as Hugh mentioned early, asking powerful questions, really important in the behavioral hiring. Getting down to sort of how somebody really reacts, asking questions based on those strengths and maybe their struggles.